documents that were fully completed and transmitted.
Just to be clear, you want me to seek those documents from the Ministry of Justice?
Well, yes. To be clear, I want you to seek the documents from anywhere you can seek from.
But the Ministry of Justice is an official ministry of the government. The National Assembly can request the ministry to provide all those documents.
The ministry has indeed provided the documents. However, your submission alone is a check on the ministry's submission.
Okay.
So
I will write to the ministry and request for the documents there.
we're grateful.
Okay.
Any other documents or any other information that you believe that the committee would be guided on? And aside from your submission, which for the record, Chair, has been marked AT, that is the witness's submission, or rather response to the has been marked AMT. And aside from that submission, Mr. Tambadu, you had the pleasure of recanting another statement with the committee's investigation team. Isn't that so?
Yes, I was interviewed. I provided my responses, which were transcribed and sent to me, and I reviewed and appended my signature accordingly.
And you just mentioned that you reviewed and agree with the content of the statement.
The signed statement, absolutely, every word in it.
Honorable Chair, the written statement by Mr. Abubakar M. Tambadu which is headed, as I've stated, would be marked AMT 1. Thank you, Mr. Tambadu. Now, for the purposes of your testimony today, before this committee, I may ask you to cast your mind back to 2017, the events that occurred in 2017, post your appointment, with particular interest to how you would describe the overall environment in early 2017, especially after your appointment. Actually, before I get to that, perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. I would ask you to introduce yourself formally for the committee and for the record, and give us a synopsis of your professional and academic life. And perhaps one that is of interest to me is on all the official documents, I see your name is stated as Mr. Abubakar M. Tambadu. However, you are well known as one Mr. Abubakar Ba Tambadu. Perhaps in that synopsis of your academic and professional background, you can, for my purposes, give me an explanation as to why you are so renownedly called Mr. Ba Tambadu.
Thank you, Council. My full names are Abubakar Mari Tambadu, because I was named after my paternal grandfather, who was fondly called Ba. So every other child who's named after my paternal grandfather is called, or paternal great-grandfather is called Ba. So you will find Ba Saho, Ba Tambadu, Ba Wage in our family. So that's why everybody calls me Ba. It's a nickname at home. But I see people write Abubakar Ba Tambadu as well. I don't know why, but I guess I answer to that name as well. I started my education. I'll start with high school at St. Augustine's High School. I finished in 1992 O levels and went to sixth form. Did 1 year and then went to the UK to do a foundation in law, and then started my law degree in 1994. Graduated in 1997, then came home to work at the Ministry of Justice as a public prosecutor. So between 1997 and 2000, I worked at the Justice Ministry as a public prosecutor and state counsel. In 97 to 2000, I went into private practice here in the Gambia with a particular interest in human rights law and advocacy. Between 2000 and 2003, that's when I left the country. In 2003, I left the country. So I worked as a public prosecutor in 97, 2000, then 2000, 2003, I went to private practice. Then from 2003 to 2012, I worked as a prosecutor at the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, where I was involved in the prosecution of international crimes, including genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. I was primarily responsible for the prosecution of the former chief of staff of the Rwandan army at the time of the genocide, General Augustin Bizimungu, who was convicted at the end of the trial. And then I was moved to the appeals division of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda in 2008, I believe, where I was also assigned the case of Mr. Colonel Theones Bagasoa, the man many believe to be the mastermind of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis. I defended his conviction on appeal, and following that, in 2012, I was made the special assistant to the prosecutor of the UN International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. This is a tribunal that the Security Council established and merged the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda as one, with a common prosecutor, a common registrar, and a common president. And I was appointed as the first special assistant to the prosecutor of that residual mechanism in 2012 until 2017, when I was offered the position of Attorney General and Minister of Justice in the country, and I resigned from the UN residual mechanism to take up my appointment here as Attorney General, which lasted until 30th June 2020.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tambadu. Perhaps at this point now, I would ask you to cast your mind back to 2017 and just give the committee a synopsis and describe the overall environment in early 2017 when the government just took control.
I think that is a very pertinent question. Context is always useful, but before I respond to that specific question, perhaps, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would like to start by expressing my own views regarding this committee. For the record, I would like to start by saying that I wholeheartedly welcome this committee. I have been a strong advocate of open, transparent, and accountable government. And I think I have demonstrated that throughout my tenure as Attorney General here in this country. And so when I saw that this committee was being established to inquire into this matter, I was quite pleased. And that's why I decided to fly into the country in person to appear before this committee and to share with the committee and the Gambian public my own views about this. And it's particularly important that this committee was set up simply because of the amount of misinformation and disinformation regarding the sale of the assets of the former president. And this, for me, is a unique opportunity to set the record straight and clear the air for a variety of reasons. Now, if this is a fault-finding process, as it appears at times, rather than a fact-finding process, which it ought to be. I can guarantee this committee that you will find flaws. And that's simply because there's no perfect process, there's no perfect system. And in a process that involves many people with many various activities, certainly there will be flaws. And I guarantee you will find. But if you're looking for evidence of improper conduct or unlawful behavior or indeed wrongdoing based on personal motives, I can also guarantee you that you will not find any. And we will see as we proceed through my testimony. I'll provide clarification. I have seen some of the evidence that was presented before the committee, not all, certainly. I haven't had the opportunity to follow all closely. But based on what I have seen so far and based on what you will hear from me in the course of my testimony, I am convinced that the committee will clear the air for the public, because that's what we are all here for in the end, the public. And so I wanted to share those with the committee before I get down to the more specific questions from Council. Now, Council, your question is quite broad. I would benefit from some specifications from you, or specifics, yes.
Just 1 minute. Council, before he goes further, let me also make the statement. We heard you very clearly. First of all, let me also say the committee appreciates the fact that you willingly travel by yourself to come to the Gambia and testify before this committee. That shows that you respect the establishment of the committee and the work that we are doing as well. But also tell you, this committee is also very much aware of its mandate, and we want to ensure that we find facts. And that is the ultimate intention of the committee as well. All that we are doing is to ensure that facts are found, and then we report what is facts. That is exactly what we will be doing. And we definitely appreciate your coming, and then we will continue doing that until at the time that we will be reporting back to plenary from this very important job. Thank you so very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council, your question is very broad. You want me to cast my mind back to 2017?
Yes, Mr. Tambari, I do. Of course, every question that I ask you is in relation to the commission. So while you are casting your mind back to 2017, I do note that you were appointed in February of that year. What is of interest to the committee are the moments leading up to the setting up of the commission.
Of the Janneh Commission, if you like.
Indeed.
By the way, that title came from me, the Janneh Commission.
I see.
Well, these were very early days after the change. It was a very, I'm not sure whether I can describe fully at one go everything that was going on in the country at that time, but suffice it to say that it was a very chaotic period, not just for the government, but for the country as a whole. I believe I was one of the last ministers who were sworn in. I was sworn in February after my appointment, when I briefly came to the country to meet with His Excellency the President at the time. And I don't recall participating in any cabinet meeting during that first period. So I had to go back and pack up my stuff to come back home finally. And I believe that occurred around March or so. But when I came back anyway, we started holding our cabinet meetings. And there was a lot of political pressure and tension at the time in the country. The new government came under tremendous public pressure to be seen to be doing something about the former president and his associates. And so at the time, cabinet discussed and decided that the first thing we should do, because I believe, I don't want to say politicians because I'm sitting in a room full of politicians, but there was pressure on the politicians in cabinet from their supporters, etc., who were seeing the businesses of the former president continuing as usual. They were seeing the businesses like the bakeries on Caraba Avenue still open and being run by associates of the former president. They were seeing cars of companies belonging to the former president roaming around. And I think the pressure was too much for the politicians in government, and in turn, they wanted to be seen to be taking action to stop those. And I believe there was value in that as well, because all of those visuals that people were seeing around were reinforcing and reminding people of the atmosphere of repression that obtained in the country up till that moment. And so it was normal for people to react in that way. Some were very angry. I recall being accosted by someone and telling me why we were not doing anything about the activities of companies and people associated with the former president, including the abattoir as well. In fact, I recall late Oye Jalo came to my office with some people who work at the abattoir, and again the pressure was on. The abattoir was still being run by the associates of former president, etc. But anyway, to summarize what I'm saying, there was a lot of political pressure for the government to be seen, to be doing something, and then the idea of freezing the assets of the former president was floated in cabinet. I recall we had exchanges amongst.
Sorry, this was when you came back.
This was when I came back in March. Yeah,
and settled in finally in office.
And settled in finally, yes.
Please proceed.
It was a cabinet room with 3 lawyers. Honorable Hussein Dabo was a lawyer, Honorable Maifati was a lawyer, and I was a lawyer. And you can imagine a room with 3 lawyers. We dominated the discussions on the way forward, what to do, etc. And I was instructed by cabinet to freeze the assets of the former president. How best to do that was left to me as Attorney General. And so that decision was made in cabinet through a cabinet resolution. In fact, it took some time before I submitted ultimately the application to freeze the assets, because I'll tell you my own views about governance. I came in as Attorney General with a concept of how a new Gambia, a new government should be run. And that is what informed every activity and action that I led at the ministry at the time. And so I was put under a lot of pressure to freeze the assets. I resisted that pressure because I wanted them to provide me with something I can go to court with. I thought that this was a new environment. The judges were going to be more assertive of their independence and impartiality, and that what obtained in the past under the former regime was not going to work anymore. And in any event, I was not prepared to go to court without a prima facie evidence on my hand. And that is why it took time between my appointment and the freezing application in May, because I wanted...
So somebody, perhaps if you would decode prima facie for the committee, okay, and for the record as well.
I wanted some evidence to go to court with. We didn't want to go to court and applied to freeze the order without anything to back it up with. And so I insisted that I wouldn't go to court without that. And various suggestions were made to go through the civil law procedure, etc. But for me, it was more than just freezing the assets. For me, it was going to be a statement that this country was going to change. It was no longer going to be business as usual, that it was going to be based on law. And so I insisted.
My apologies. Who were you having this discussion with?
In cabinet.
In cabinet. Okay.
Yes, in cabinet. Everyone knew my position.
All right.
I wanted, in particular, the Ministry of Finance to provide me with evidence that I could use to go to court. And that was not forthcoming as quickly as I would have liked. Notwithstanding the pressure, I still didn't want to go to court.
And who was the minister at that time? The Minister of Finance?
Honorable Amadou Sane. So between February, March, April, May, ultimately, I received something. It was the late Secretary General Fadera who called me in the evening when I was already home and told me that he has obtained information from the Financial Intelligence Unit about the financial transactions of the former president, which I could look at and see whether that would be helpful. So I actually recall to this day, that was the first and only time I visited late Fadera's residence. I believe in Bruford. I had to drive there myself at night to go and pick it up because I was also under pressure to do something. I didn't want to wait until the morning, then it is sent. Sometimes government communications takes time. So I drove myself at night to Fadera's house, got the information from him, went home, looked at it briefly, and then the next morning I called my team to a meeting for us to take a look.
If I can just, if you could hold on there. The document you're referring to, it's a document, a report from the Financial Intelligence Unit.
Yes, it's a report. If I recall correctly, it was certainly bank accounts. It was a statement of accounts with transactions listed. And I believe it was on the cover of a report. I can't recall now exactly, but it certainly provided us with the smoking gun we needed. Because when we looked at the document at the ministry, we realized that some of the activities could be classified as money laundering activities. So that's when we started thinking about how to make the application for the freezing order.
So just on that point, and we will definitely get into the freezing order much later, but on that point, the document from FIU, was it ever submitted officially to the Ministry of Justice?
Well, that was the official submission. I had to pick it up myself.
Okay.
I had to pick it up myself. If you have a document, show it to me. Maybe it will refresh my memory about that.
That's precisely why I asked whether it was officially sent to the Ministry of Justice.
It was still official. It was handed over to me by the Secretary General in the President's office. Official is not only restricted to written communication.
Well, my perception of official is something that is on record.
Yeah, well,
And this was a submission that was, if I may say, informal. I do not want to use clandestine, rather informal, but still a submission nonetheless. And that's precisely why a summons was issued to you, because if that document was not officially sent to the MOJ, they would not have it on their record to make it available for us. And thereby, the committee would excuse the MOJ from not submitting that. However, you had received the document yourself. Of course, I'm sure your Solicitor General would have seen it at some point. However, it should have passed through him for official transmission of the document. Now, I'm interested in this point because that document will be of interest to the committee. If you can facilitate, Honorable Chair, if I can ask that the witness provide that document to the committee. the report from FIU?
You know, Council, you're right when you say it was informal, but it was nevertheless, as I said, official, because it was from one state, senior state official to another. These were extraordinary times, as I said. There was chaos. I mean, if I wanted to wait for the official channels, so that means the Secretary General, or rather the FIU, would have written their report, send it to the Ministry of Finance in the official channel. The Ministry of Finance would then send it to the Office of the President, and the Office of the President would treat it. It will go through the communications procedures internally, then get to the Secretary General, and then the Secretary General or his office would then write to solicit. It was going to take time. And so that's why I had to, because you need to appreciate the pressure under which the government was at that time to take quick action. But anyway, that document was the basis, formed the basis of our application for the freezing order. So I am surprised that you couldn't find it. I'm not sure if you had requested it from the ministry, but I'll be very surprised if it's not there, because my team and I worked on that document at the time, including the Solicitor General and orders from the Civil Litigation Department. But in any event, we received this document, and we now had our smoking gun. We now had some evidence to use to freeze the assets.
All right, before we go to the assets, let's still linger around your time when you just assumed office. With regards to the assets, what were the immediate concerns that arose regarding assets at the time of the transition?
You want me to be honest?
Please.
It was not high on my priority list. We were dealing with more fundamental issues of governance. We wanted to change the political trajectory of this country, because that was what that moment was all about in 2016 December. So the assets were not high on my priority list, to be honest. I had more, I wouldn't say more important things, but I had equally or perhaps more pressing issues of governance to deal with. You would be surprised if I give you a rundown of the list of issues we had to deal with between 2017 and 2019 alone. Just that 2-year window. It was incredible. Yes, at the time, to be honest, the assets were not high on my priority list. My ministry was focusing on more fundamental issues of governance at that time. We at the time knew that the local government elections were coming. We wanted to change the laws to facilitate more direct participation, etc. So those were all issues that we were dealing with. There was just chaos, as I said, in government and outside government. We were overwhelmed, not just at my ministry, but the entire government, I believe. And so you can imagine in situations like that with less resources at the ministry, I wasn't going to give the assets a high priority on my list.
All right, that's understood. However, I still would like to know, with regards to the assets, what were the particular concerns the government had before you received any reports?
Well, I believe I did say that there was political pressure from supporters of the politicians in cabinet, because they continue to see the symbols, signs, vestiges of repression on a daily basis. It was as if nothing had changed in the country at that time. It was as if business as usual. It was business as usual, because the activities of the former president, insofar as his companies and his close associates were concerned, were still going on. And I believe people were not amused about that. And so the government wanted, as I said, to be seen, to be taking action on those assets, because that meant removing from the public eye these reminders of the repressive state that was prevalent in the country at the time. But that was the, I believe, primary motivation of the government. But they were also receiving reports that the assets were being dissipated as well. There were reports that cattle were being stolen and taken to Senegal. There were reports that some of the assets were idling around. Vehicles, motor vehicles were discovered somewhere in Casamas, I believe. So there was also this concern that the assets were being dissipated. So the government also wanted to preserve those assets. And I think that was perhaps the second motivation for the government's desire to take action on the assets.
You speak of reports. Where did these reports emanate from?
From the public. People will hear, colleagues would tell me this is what's happening, that's what's happening, just generally.
So they were not necessarily documented reports.
At that time, no one had time for documented reports of incidents like that early 2017. Were you in the country?
I wasn't, but
Okay.
I'm happy that I'm not the witness today.
Lucky you.
Yes. Well, the reason I ask what reports, Mr. Tambal, and I would just segue for a bit, but come back to 2017. Since I wasn't here, I want a very apt depiction of the atmosphere at the time. But my segue will take you to MOJ2, Chair. MOJ2 is the legal notice that established the committee. Now, the commission rather. Now, the first paragraph of that legal notice, if the Secretariat could provide the witness with a copy. So I believe it's before you.
Okay.
Please read aloud perhaps the first sentence. I believe it's one sentence, the entire paragraph, but read until perhaps where there's a listing of institutions.
It's the preamble, right?
Yes.
Okay. Whereas preliminary reports received from, among other things, the Central Bank of the Gambia, Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation, Gambia Ports Authority, Gambia Telecommunications Company Limited, National Electricity Company Limited.
That's fine. I would not burden you to go through the entire list. My point, the point I'm trying to underscore here is that the legal notice itself references preliminary reports from several institutions, which it goes on to list. Are these the reports that you are referring to when you mentioned that reports came from several institutions?
Through the FIU report that was shared with us, yes, the financial intelligence report clearly showed transactions from all these institutions with the former president, certainly.
So essentially, the first paragraph of the preamble is referencing that document from FIU.
Including that document, yes. Including that document.
So that document and all the MOMAs around town.
They were not memos, they were reports.
I see.
They were not written reports.
Okay.
I don't think Gambians are fond of written reports. The public would call, they would go see officials and tell them XYZ. Officials from those institutions will share their own experiences.
These were reports from officials.
including officials, yes.
All right.
Officials, ordinary citizens, the documents from the financial unit, all of that together. Yeah.
I'm still interested in how the reports, other than the FIU report, were received. Now, you did say they were verbal reports, but how were they received? Was it that they came to the Ministry of Justice to inform you, or was it just casual conversations with acquaintances? How did they come about?
I tell you how I received the reports. I don't know how others received the reports, but I received the reports from one, the document from the Financial Intelligence Unit, and two, from my colleagues in cabinet. Don't forget that all of these institutions have line ministries. So the ministers would share with me information as part of the discussions about what action the government should take against the former president at that moment. So they were sharing their own reports, albeit, as I said, not written reports, but the report of the FIU alone provided us with sufficient basis to take action.
Yes, I'm curious in the manner in which the reports came about, because I would like to know whether, as they came verbally, did you metamorphose them into written instructions or information?
It was in the
as they were
context of
coming?
cabinet discussions, and there are minutes of cabinet meetings. They might have been captured in those minutes, but it was in the context of discussions in cabinet.
So, okay, so for the record, let's say it was the FIU report and the discussions amongst the different ministers or ministries in cabinet.
Yes, which form part of the report referenced in the preamble to the legal notice. But as far as I was concerned in my ministry, it was the report of the FIU that made the difference.
Very well. How did the government first identify which assets to investigate or to preserve? In fact, how did the government first identify assets?
That's why we froze all the assets. There was no identification of which assets to, there's no process of identifying the assets. We froze all the assets because one, we didn't have the resources to even venture into something like that. We had no idea what the scale of these assets were. I certainly didn't. And so out of the abundance of caution, you freeze all the assets. And that's what we did.
Now, you say you freeze all the assets. And my question is, how did you come about gathering all the assets?
As in, how did we get
How did you-
information about
yes,
the
how
assets?
did you identify those assets?
Okay. For the bank accounts, the Financial Intelligence Unit provided us with the bank accounts. For the landed properties, the Ministry of Lands provided us with a list of properties that purportedly belong to the former president. In terms of the motor vehicles, as far as I was concerned, because I recall having been consulted by late Secretary General Fadera about the motor vehicles which were found at State House, I think, as in all authoritarian systems, there is a thin line between the head of that authoritarian system and the state. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the phrase "l'état c'est moi." That is common in dictatorships. And so it's difficult to draw the line between what was personal and what was national. So late Secretary Fadera did once consult me on the vehicles that were found at State House. I think finance wanted to do something with the vehicles. I can't remember now exactly. I'm going older, as you can see, so my memory is failing me. And I recall giving him advice at that time over the phone that any vehicle that were found on state property are to be presumed to belong to the state until the contrary is proved. So if anybody has a claim over those vehicles, it's up to them to come and state that claim. But the default position for the government is to make the assumption, it was rebuttable, of course, as I said, based on evidence, but to make the assumption that they are state property. And so the finance ministry and the government could do what they wanted with those vehicles, because as far as I was concerned, they were found on state property, they belong to the state. So these are the three categories of assets I believe that we discussed at that time. So the landed properties, the cattle, and the motor vehicles.
Okay, we will get to the assets a bit later. You have mentioned that public concern or public consideration was top amongst the list as to how and why the government acted the way it did in 2017.
As far as my political colleagues were concerned, yes,
Yeah.
not me personally.
What about the international community, international partners? Did they play a role in how fast the government acted?
At that point, I think I was at the same wavelength with members of the international community, both in and outside the country. Our preoccupation at that time, the most pressing issue was governance. How do we ensure that there is peace and stability in this country following the forced departure of the former president? It was a very fragile moment for our country. It was a very volatile moment, and our preoccupation was ensuring that there was stability and peace, and not just peace, sustainable peace. And you can imagine in that context, assets wouldn't be the priority of members of the international community in this country as well. So I was on the same wavelength with them.
All right, thank you. You had mentioned or made reference to your political colleagues. Please clarify for the committee who you're referring to when you say
The politicians who were in cabinet.
the
There
ministers.
were a number of them, yes.
All right.
Ministers.
So that the members of cabinet then.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. I'm also curious to know how the government balanced the need for speed vis-a-vis the need for accuracy and ensuring fairness in the asset investigation. That is prior to commencement of the
speed and fairness. When you say fairness, what do you mean exactly?
To ensure that there are procedures and protocols put in place to ensure that the whole process of investigation is transparent.
Counsel, since you were not in this country, let me help you a little bit more.
Thank you very much. I would really appreciate that.
We were witnessing for the first time in our history here a change of government, at least in my generation, a change of government that ultimately led this country on the verge of violent conflict. Gambians were leaving these shores to find refuge in neighboring countries. That's how tense the situation was at that time. We were getting ready to see on Gambian soil foreign soldiers who were coming in to preserve the peace and make sure that there was handover of power of some form, whether by force or by peaceful means. And that's what I meant when I said it was a chaotic time early on. Maybe I need to be more explicit now so that there
Please,
is clarity.
Please do.
We were just recovering from the verge of a violent conflict. And the government's priorities was not to secure the assets of the president. Our priority was to ensure that despite all the factors that could lead to conflict were present in this country, we were doing our utmost to ensure that there was peace and that there was a smooth transition, both within the armed and security services, because we were receiving the reports. I was receiving these intelligence reports at that time. And even amongst ordinary citizens.
Are we speaking of the same reports? You had mentioned intelligence.
No, these were reports about this general security situation in the country,
Okay.
including within the armed forces. Even amongst the local population, amongst communities, there was apprehension, there was fear of reprisals and retaliation. And we were doing all we can to manage that situation. The unfortunate death of Haruna Jatta in Kanilai was not an isolated incident. It was unfortunate, but it was not an isolated incident. But it also illustrated the tension, the visible tension that was in the country at that time. The Faraba Banta situation, which led unfortunately again to some deaths, was another illustration of the tension that was in the country amongst communities, etc. So that's why I said the assets of the former president to me were not high on my priority list. I had more pressing governance matters to deal with to ensure that we could even do anything about those assets, because without the right environment at that time, you can't do much. So our priority was ensuring that the environment was conducive to building upon our democracy. So whether we did anything to make sure that the preservation of the assets was fair, etc., we did the best we could under the circumstances. We identified the assets in these three categories, and we submitted our application to the court for a freezing order, freezing all of those assets as appropriate.
Yes, like I said, we'll get to that. My concern here is, were there measures put in place prior to going to investigation?
Help me here. When you say measures prior to investigation, what do you mean? Because the investigation, there was a preliminary report based on which we went to court to seek the freezing order, and then the investigations developed after that. So what period are you talking about?
So once the government was properly seated.
Properly?
Yes.
I'll qualify that.
Once the government was seated, or perhaps I would maintain once the government was properly seated and the reports came in, now these reports would have to be substantiated, and that would warrant for an exercise to ensue. And that exercise is what I'm referring to as the investigations.
They didn't need at that point to be necessarily substantiated. We had enough substantiation to go to court with. That was the starting point. If you have reasonable basis to take action, you can take action, and then you can investigate further. If I were to give an analogy, is if a police suspects you of committing a crime and they think that you're a flight risk, they will arrest you, and you go to court, you request for bail. They will, when they oppose bail on the basis of additional investigations, that's because what they have at that point, up to that point, was preliminary evidence to arrest you. Now they need to build upon that evidence by conducting investigations. And the reason they would usually oppose bail is so that there is no interference in that additional investigation. So that's exactly the situation here. We had enough evidence in our hands, which I demanded. Before that, we didn't have any. That's why I didn't go to court between February, March, April, until May. But when we had the financial investigations unit share their reports with us, we used that as a basis to first seek the freezing order and then start investigations as a result of that report. So the investigations came after we received the preliminary report from the FIU.
And those investigations were to verify the information that was in that report.
Including to verify the information that was in that report, including. It was not just limited to
Yes.
that.
So you see, my question relates to how you went about that investigation, what measures you put in place to ensure that the process is seen to be transparent. You see, just like the analogy you just provided, just like the accused person would be remanded for further investigation, you see, the prosecutor would know that it's his liberty that he's playing with, and I'm sure the court would perhaps not playing with, but his liberty at stake, and the court would have that in mind as well, and the court would ensure that it binds the investigators, the prosecutors, to a time limit, so as not to cause an infraction on the accused person's liberty. In the same vein, the investigations, your testimony here today, you have attested to the fact that in 2017, the environment was chaotic. And perhaps if I can add salt to the wound to say that the environment was not only chaotic because of the regime that you took over from, but also there were proponents from that regime that were demanding to be dealt with fairly by the government. Now, with that in mind, what measures did the government put in place? Now, when I say the government, this would be the MOJ, which you were the head of. At this time, it was limited to the MOJ, I presume. Correct?
I am not very clear about your question in terms of.
So I'm giving you context to the question.
No, I get the context.
You get the context, okay. Please go ahead.
Yeah, because the witness kept referring to FIU as the Financial Investigation Unit, and I think it should be the Financial Intelligence Unit if we can correct that.
Sure.
If I said investigation, then I misspoke. You're absolutely right. It's Financial Intelligence Unit. Yeah.
Right. So the government would have had in mind that there's a lot at stake. The government needs to recover all the assets that were modeled in as part of state assets or not, and decipher between the two. And that exercise alone should have warranted some caution with the government to be able to decipher what is what. And that's what I'm referring to. When your team or whoever did the investigations, when they were going out to do investigations, did they, before they went out to do investigations rather, did you put any measures in place to ensure that everybody's in the picture? There are measures in place to ensure that from a third party's point of view, the process is as it should. I hope that helps.
Again, I am a little bit lost. There was certainly a lot at stake, but there was more at stake about the peace and tranquility of this country. And that's why our focus was on governance, as I said, and not the assets, because the properties weren't going to go anywhere. The landed properties in this country, the vehicles are on state property. Some of the cattle have been discovered. There are reports that others have been stolen, etc. But to be honest, if I had to deal with security sector reform or the establishment of a truth commission, the transitional justice process, I mean, the assets recovery was also part of it, certainly. But I had to prioritize, especially given the resources available at the ministry. So again, the assets were important, but there were more pressing matters to deal with at that time. Now, in terms of the investigations, that's where I am a little bit at a loss. I don't know exactly what you mean, but the establishment of the Janneh Commission was part of that investigative process. That's why we established the Janneh Commission to also investigate. We also reached out to our Senegalese colleagues across the border to find out about the cattle that were being moved across the border and some of the vehicles that were being shipped across the border. So those are some of the activities that the investigators were engaging.
All right. I'm tempted to ask the question again in a different way. However, we can proceed. It will come up again. Were there any disagreements within government? When I say government, perhaps cabinet, as to what approach to take in the asset recovery? You had mentioned that there were 3 lawyers.
Yeah, there were no disagreements. Ideas were just being proposed on the best way forward, all of which I took into account when we were making our final decision at the ministry. So there was no disagreement. I think we were all agreed in principle to take action. How best to take that action is what we were discussing, and ideas were put forward, and for my consideration as the Attorney General.
Now, I can appreciate that the ideas were put forward, and perhaps the idea of a commission was the idea that was then heeded to. However,
the idea of the commission came after. We're now at the assets freezing stage. Or did I confuse your question? Because the discussions in cabinet and the ideas that were being proposed was how best to take interim measures while we consider what comes next. So the decision to set up the commission came after.
Came after, I see.
But as a first step, we wanted to secure and preserve the
assets. At that time, the mind of the government was on preservation.
Indeed. As a first step.
I see. All right, going back to investigation, I presume there was investigation of some sort. Let me call it preliminary investigation, because you have rightly mentioned the commission was part of that investigation. So the preliminary investigation, and then you proceeded to court.
Yes, we used the information from the FIU mostly to seek the court orders.
So did the atmosphere at the time of the transition make it difficult to coordinate amongst your peers, in the other ministries?
The atmosphere made everything difficult at that time, not just to communicate with other ministries. It was a very difficult situation, let me put it that way. You know, one of the legacies of dictatorship, I'm sorry I have to keep providing that context so you can better appreciate the environment at the time. One of the legacies of dictatorship is that power is centralized. It will be helpful if you call upon the expertise of political scientists. I see one in the room who can help you understand what that means in terms of the effect that it has on governance, especially if it occurred continuously uninterrupted for over 2 decades. That's an awfully long time for any society. So the atmosphere at that time was what we inherited. There were no protocols, no regulations, no guidelines on how things were done democratically, if you like, how a normal system of government should function. I'm not saying they were not there, they were in the books, etc., but they were not being used because I guess in an authoritarian system, those do not matter. What matters is the power that emanates from the central authority, and everybody goes by instructions. Instructions are issued and they are carried out, and that's the bottom line. So this government inherited that system those who were working in that system, that's what they know how to function. And so it was going to take time, which is part of the reason why the government initiated a civil service reform, is to exactly remedy that flawed process, if you like, in terms of governance. And so the government inherited a system that was really not a system in the proper sense of the word. And we had to work within that system, especially in the early days, and build it from within. And we're still in that process, I have to say. I don't think that we have achieved the level of democratic governance that we would want in this country. 8 years is not an awfully long time to change a system of government. And so, yep, it was chaotic, it was difficult to communicate with different ministries in the normal sense, if you like. But we did make use of the best opportunities we had. And yep, we made it work in the end.
All right, so I would allow you to narrate from.
Council.
Honorable Chair.
If you don't mind, I think we can stand down for 10 minutes. At least also allow the witness, because it seems the place is a bit hot. Yeah, it's not conducive at all, so that we can address that first.
That's fine.
He's waiting, please.
That's fine.
At least 10 minutes, please. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.